Imagine this. You are in the middle of a heated argument. Your heart is pounding. Your mind is full of arguments, ready to shoot like arrows from a drawn bow. You feel the need to respond, to defend yourself, to show them you're not someone to be taken lightly. But what if I told you that the very moment you feel compelled to react, you've already lost something deeply important? Because strength, real strength, isn't in how loudly you speak. It isn't in getting the last word, and it certainly isn't in proving you're right. Society has taught us that speaking gives us value, that silence is weakness, that not reacting means surrender. But Nietzsche, he saw the opposite. To Nietzsche, power doesn't lie in shouting. It lies in restraint. It lies in the decision not to react. It lies in the kind of silence that makes the whole world uneasy. We are living in an age of noise. Social media, podcasts, endless debates. Everyone wants to talk. Everyone wants to be heard. But in the middle of that storm, the truly powerful ones are silent. They don't rush to say anything. They don't need the spotlight. They wait. They observe. And when they finally speak just one word, it drops like a stone on the surface of a still lake. Nietzsche understood a brutal truth about human nature. The urge to explain, to justify, is not a sign of strength. It's a confession. A confession that you're still dependent on being understood, being accepted, being seen. But the Übermensch, Nietzsche's Superman, doesn't need any of that. He chooses silence like a blade, not to hide, but to take control. So I ask you, do you control your words? Or do your words control you? Because in this noisy world, the one who truly stands out is not the loudest, but the one who can stay silent, calm, unreadable, and free from the need to be understood. Today, we enter the depths of silence, silence through Nietzsche's lens, and why mastering it may be the most powerful thing you can do in this modern world. Stay with me. Try to listen, not to the world outside, but to the chaos happening inside you, the heartbeat, the non-stop stream of thoughts, the urge to say something, to respond, to prove that you still exist. We are living in an unprecedented era, one where silence is treated like a system failure, because everyone is speaking, everyone is sharing, everyone is trying to scream as loud as they can. Not because they have something deep to say, but because they're afraid of not being heard. Nietzsche once warned, when speaking becomes mandatory, when everyone feels they must say something, then most of what's being spoken is no longer thought. It becomes reflex, the reaction of the weak, those who have not mastered themselves. It sounds harsh, but just look at reality. Social media is no longer a place to connect. It has become a battlefield of words, where people don't talk to understand one another, but to fight for their egos. Victory doesn't go to the one who is right. It goes to the one who is louder, faster, more emotional, and often more afraid. Because deep down, most of us fear being forgotten. We fear that if we don't respond, if we don't speak, we won't be counted as part of the social game. And Nietzsche, with his cold, surgical gaze, saw this over a century ago. He called it slave morality, a morality born from fear, from the perspective of the weak. The weak do not dare exist alone. They need validation through the eyes of others. They need likes, agreement, and understanding. And to gain that, they speak endlessly, even when there's nothing left to say. They speak as if the moment they stop, the world will forget they ever existed. They are controlled by the herd instinct, which Nietzsche considered one of the greatest diseases of the modern age. That instinct pushes us to follow the crowd, to fear being different, to fear silence, to fear standing alone. It convinces us, if everyone is speaking, then I must speak too. And here, Nietzsche reveals a terrifying paradox. The modern ego, which believes it is expressing itself through speech, is actually exposing its dependence on the gaze of others. We speak out of fear, not out of understanding. We speak to avoid listening, not to truly connect. But Nietzsche offered a different archetype, the one who defies the crowd's order, the one who dares to master the fear of being misunderstood, the one who no longer needs agreement because he assigns value to himself. He is the Übermensch, the Superman. And one of the clearest signs of that inner strength is silence. Not silence out of weakness, but silence as a weapon, as a choice, as a refusal to play by the herd's rules. He knows one thing with clarity. The weak speak because they fear being forgotten. The strong stay silent because they know they don't need to be remembered to be valuable. Have you ever witnessed this? A true leader doesn't need to shout. They simply show up. And the whole room falls silent, because people feel the weight of that silence. It's presence without needing to prove anything. It's strength without needing anyone's approval. And that is the message Nietzsche left us with. If you cannot bear the silence within yourself, it might be because you're avoiding a deeper truth that you've been too afraid to face. Nietzsche didn't just observe the world, he questioned it, and then he challenged it. In his eyes, most of humanity lived like domesticated creatures, well-behaved children growing up in the cages of collective morality. Everyone was taught to obey, to fit in, to live the right way. But Nietzsche saw the hidden truth behind it all. These rules weren't made to make you strong. They were made to make you controllable. And so, he created the figure of the ultimate opposite, the Übermensch, the Superman. Not someone with superhuman muscles, wealth, or social power, but someone who possessed something far rarer, complete mastery over themselves. The Übermensch doesn't need to be understood. He doesn't react with impulsive emotion. He doesn't rush to answer every attack or every question. And his sharpest weapon is silence. Silence, not for avoidance, but to flip the board entirely. Picture this. You confront someone. You provoke them. You wait for a reaction, a response, a signal. But instead, absolute silence. In that moment, power shifts. The other person doesn't need to speak, and you start questioning yourself. What are they thinking? Do they know something I don't? Did I go too far? Silence, when used precisely, can make others reveal their weaknesses, expose their fears, and drain their confidence. All while you, the silent one, do nothing. No words, just presence. As an unknown, and that is what terrifies modern society. We live in a culture where people must speak to feel alive. A culture that cannot bear silence. Because silence forces people to turn inward. And turning inward means facing yourself. Something most people are never taught to do, and don't have the courage to endure. But the Übermensch, he doesn't just endure it. He chooses it. He lives in it. His silence is not empty. It is dense. It carries weight. It makes others feel like they're standing before a wall that cannot be penetrated. When the whole world is shouting to prove itself, the one who remains silent is the one who cannot be manipulated. And the world fears people like that. Have you ever seen it? Intense debate. One person grows frantic, throwing out arguments, raising their voice, trying to dominate. and across from them someone calm, silent, unshaken. Who is really in control? Nietzsche didn't need to explain. The answer lies in the discomfort you feel when faced with that kind of silence. The one who reacts loses control. They are ruled by emotion, by circumstances, by the eyes of others. But the one who holds their silence, they are holding the tempo of the battle. They steer the atmosphere by not reacting. That is art. No need to draw a sword. They make the other side stab themselves. Nietzsche saw a truth most of us are unwilling to admit. When you constantly feel the need to explain yourself, when you feel obligated to speak in every situation, you are losing your freedom. You're no longer choosing your words. You're being forced to speak, just to ease others. You're not making sound. You're performing in a social circus. And the terrifying part is, you don't even realize you've become a puppet. But those who can remain silent, they are not being led. They create space. And in that space, the truth of others reveals itself. When not responded to, people speak more than they should. They expose their nature. They fall into their own insecurity. Silence is not just an absence of sound. It is a mirror that forces the other person to face themselves, no place to hide. No noise to mask the truth. Just them. And the rawness of their mind. And here's the remarkable thing: when you master silence, you're not just controlling the moment. You're challenging the entire psychological structure of your opponent. Because most people define themselves through the reactions of others. They say something and they need your response to feel certain. When you give no response, they fall into uncertainty. Uncertainty turns to anxiety. Anxiety turns to panic. With one well-timed silence, you make them reveal everything they tried to hide with words. And this is what Nietzsche wanted us to understand. In a world where everyone is driven to perform, the one who dares not to react is the one who cannot be controlled. They don't rush to speak their mind. They don't need to appear in every discussion. They don't argue. They don't debate. They don't need to win with words. Because their unreadable presence alone is a form of power that makes others pause. Be honest with yourself. How many times have you felt uncomfortable in a moment of silence? A meal where no one speaks. A message you send that receives no reply. A question that hangs in the air with no explanation. You feel uneasy. You grow anxious. You try to fill that silence with anything, empty words. Small talk. Even apologies you don't fully understand. Why? Because silence for most people is unbearable. It's not just the absence of sound. It's a mirror that reflects the very thing you've been avoiding. Who are you when there's no one responding to you? Nietzsche understood this. Most of humanity builds their sense of self through the eyes of others. We exist through reactions. We live to be recognized. And because of that, we become slaves to external validation. We don't dare to stay silent. Because silence means carrying the full weight of our own presence. There's no place to hide. No words to shield our insecurity. Only one haunting question remains: do I exist? If no one confirms it, and here, Nietzsche delivers a brutal slap to the modern face. He says he who must be understood in order to live has never truly lived. He who needs comfort to take a step has never actually walked. We think we are independent, but in truth, we're just waiting for someone's approving gaze, to give ourselves permission to exist. Meanwhile, the Übermensch, the Superman, needs no one to understand him. He doesn't seek acceptance. He doesn't crave agreement. He doesn't beg for a sympathetic glance. And because of that, he is free. He dares to be silent. He dares to face the cold of solitude. He dares to endure the cost of not belonging. And from that stillness, A new kind of power is born, not the power to control others, but the power not to be controlled by others. The world calls him arrogant, cold, emotionless. But in truth, they're just afraid. They don't know how to define someone who refuses to be defined. They don't know how to deal with a person who doesn't need to be understood. Why? Because they've never lived that way themselves. They only exist through the faces of others, through validation, applause, and crowd approval. They live as if always holding a microphone, always ready to justify every step they take. But the Superman, he walks in silence. Each step he takes doesn't need applause, yet it echoes like a drumbeat across the desert. And in that solitude, he becomes a force that cannot be moved. Look this question in the eye. Can you live without being understood? Without having to explain? Without having to justify? Without saying I'm right? Just existing quietly, firmly, completely. Nietzsche believed very few people have the strength to do that. Most live as if they owe the world an explanation for their actions, for their thoughts, for their feelings. They try to speak, to prove, to make others understand them, because they've never allowed themselves to exist as a mystery. But Nietzsche, he didn't need the world to understand him. He wrote for souls that hadn't been born yet. He said things the world wasn't ready to hear, and he was silent whenever he wanted. That is power. The power of someone who doesn't need permission to be themselves. This is what Nietzsche called the will to power, not the power to control others, but the power to not be controlled, to not need to be liked, to not need agreement, to not need a response. A person like that, their mere existence is a challenge, and their silence is a wordless declaration. I don't play your game. Have you ever seen it? Someone who doesn't react when provoked, who doesn't answer when attacked, who doesn't feel the need to clear things up. It's like standing before a rock in the ocean. Unmovable, impenetrable, unreachable. And because of that, uncontrollable. That is not coldness. That is freedom. Freedom from being defined by others' reactions. Think about it. What if tomorrow you stopped explaining, stopped responding to every misunderstanding, stopped trying to prove that you are good, smart, acceptable? What would be left? That silence might say more about you than any explanation ever could. It might say, you finally stopped being the world's puppet. You want to master silence. You don't need slogans. Just start with something simple. Don't react immediately. Nietzsche never promoted eternal silence. He didn't tell you to live like a statue. He simply asked, are you reacting or choosing? Because there's a massive difference between staying silent out of fear of speaking and staying silent because you've transcended the need to speak. Learn to observe before you respond. Learn to pause. In that pause, you to be a slave to emotion. You break the circuit that drives the crowd. You step out of the wildfire of herd reaction. Nietzsche understood this. Most people react before they think. They respond before they understand. They speak not because they have something deep to say, but because they can't handle the silence. And from that, he offered a rule with immense power. Not every conversation deserves your presence. It sounds simple, but let's be honest. How many times in the past month have you said something just to fill the space? To save face? To fight the fear that if you didn't speak, you'd be left out? Nietzsche would look you in the eye and ask, why do you hand your power to noise? The truth is, many of the conversations you're having, they're not dialogues. They're ego collisions. No one's listening. Everyone's just waiting for their turn to react. And you have the right not to play. You have the right to stay silent. You have the right to choose. Is this conversation worthy of carrying my voice? Now imagine this: if you start speaking less, if every word you say carries weight, if others pause every time you open your mouth, then you've shifted from being swept by the current to becoming the source of the current. That is an art. To speak rarely but at the right time. To be silent but fully present. And when you finally speak, it's no longer a reaction. It's a strike. Have you ever noticed that the quietest person in the room is often the one who draws the most attention? They don't say a word. They just sit there, observing. No need to interrupt. No need to steal the spotlight. No need to wave flags or bang drums. And it's precisely that lack of reaction that makes every eye naturally turn toward them. Nietzsche understood this deeply. To him, real power isn't in the ability to dominate others, but in the ability to keep your own mind free from domination. And one of the purest forms of that power is timely silence. You see, in every conversation, every conflict, every social interaction, there is always something happening beneath the surface. A silent struggle to control the psychological space. Who reacts first? Who loses their temper? Who slips up? Who reveals a weakness? And Nietzsche discovered this. The one who holds their silence is the one steering the flow of the situation. Their silence creates a vacuum, a void that others feel compelled to fill with assumptions, anxiety, and insecurity. It's like a chessboard. When you make no move, your opponent starts to worry. They fear you have a plan. They assume you know something they don't. They react to things you haven't even said. And that is the first victory. Silence is the strategy of those who don't need to win with words. Why do you think the masters of negotiation, strategy, and psychology are always the ones who speak the least? Because they know words are energy. And the less you use, the more they're worth. People who talk too much think they're in control. But in truth, they're playing someone else's game. They react. They defend. They explain. But the silent one, they choose their moment. And every word they say cuts like a blade. No fluff. No waste. Impossible to forget. Silence is existential resistance. In a world where everyone's shouting over one another, the one who dares to be silent is a rebel. No need to protest. No need to slam the table or raise your voice. Just by refusing to respond, you disrupt the entire social order. Society cannot handle people who don't react. Why? Because most collective power is built on reflex. You act, I respond. You attack, I defend. You provoke, I explain. But when you do nothing, the system breaks. You become an unknown, unpredictable, a mirror forcing others to confront their own insecurity. And in that moment, you're not just controlling the situation. You're making people confront themselves. Nietzsche didn't stay silent because he had nothing to say. He stayed silent because some truths must be felt, not preached. We live in an era where everyone is desperate to speak, where silence is mistaken for weakness or passivity. But Nietzsche taught the opposite. The strongest person is the one who doesn't need to be heard in order to exist. You don't need to win every argument. You don't need to reply to every comment online. You don't need to clear things up every time someone misunderstands you. Because if you have to explain yourself just to exist, then you haven't truly existed at all. Silence is not retreat. It is the unspoken declaration of someone who has transcended the need to be validated. Nietzsche called it the victory of the will. When you are silent, not because you're afraid to speak, but because you no longer need to speak, You reclaim your freedom. And in that moment, everything shifts. You're no longer being pulled by the world. You become the gravitational center of your own being. Silence is no longer emptiness. It becomes a force field, a presence that cannot be ignored. So let me ask you, when was the last time you remained silent while everyone waited for your reaction? When was the last time you didn't speak? Not because you had nothing to say, but because you no longer needed to say it. If you've experienced that moment, you know exactly how powerful it feels. And if you haven't, then this is the moment to begin. You've listened to everything I've said, or rather, everything Nietzsche has been whispering through me, about the power of silence, about the difference between the one who reacts and the one who remains unreadable, about a person who doesn't need words to assert themselves, because their presence alone is enough. And now, it's your turn. I'm not asking what you'll say next. I'm asking this: can you remain silent while everyone else is shouting? Can you let someone misunderstand you without needing to correct them? Can you walk away from an argument, leaving nothing behind but your silence? Because if you can, you're no longer living for the world's gaze. You've entered a new level, where the ego no longer needs to be proven, where honor isn't earned through reaction, where power begins with the mastery of yourself. And if you can do that, the world won't know what to do with you. They'll call you cold, arrogant, hard to understand, because your silence forces them to face their own insecurity. But you know it's not arrogance. It's freedom, a kind of freedom that needs no banners, no flags, no chants. A freedom so deep, it doesn't make noise. It only makes presence. Nietzsche didn't leave us with a system of beliefs. He left us with a living question. Do you dare to exist without asking for permission? And today that question comes to you, not as a challenge, but as an invitation. From this moment on, you don't have to speak all the time. You don't have to respond to every provocation. You don't have to react to every glance, every comment, every rejection. You only need to be fully silent with weight and move forward without needing to prove anything. I don't know who you are, but if you've listened this far, I know one thing for sure. You are no longer who you were. I choose silence with weight, not because I have nothing to say, but because I no longer need to be heard in order to exist. If this touched you, let it live in silence. But if you want others to feel it too, leave a trace. A like, a share, a whisper for someone else who's also searching for solidity in a world full of reaction. And if you want to go deeper, watch the next video. Not because I told you to, but because if you're still here, you're ready.